Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So, Maryland lawmakers recently voted to create a commission to study and recommend potential reparations for African Americans. Those potential reparations include an apology, monetary compensation, property tax rebates, down payments on homes, debt forgiveness, tuition payment, and other potential forms of reparations. And at this point, all this that needs to happen is the governor needs to sign the bill in order for it to become law. And from what I understand, and reading a couple of articles about this, Governor Wes Moore has declined to say whether or not he will endorse this bill or sign this bill into law. And for those who don't know, Governor Wes Moore is an African American. He's the first African American governor in Maryland. And the other thing that I want to point out before I get into my commentary is that New York and California approved and passed reparations legislation as well some time ago. And so I want to share my thoughts about this issue. You know, number one, this is a prime example of just how important elections are. You know, you have some people that downplay elections, you know, some people that tell Black people that we need to hold our vote and all that kind of stuff. If people held their vote, they wouldn't have been in a position to elect lawmakers that would enact, you know, this type of legislation, the kind of legislation that we often hear people talk about the need for. So elections are very important. It's very important that we elect people that are in alignment with our agenda. And reparations has to be at the forefront of any Black agenda. So this is a major step forward. This is, you know, an accomplishment. And hopefully Maryland's first Black governor will sign this into law. So this is a major development. And I've seen comments online, various comments online. I posted this particular article on a page called Baltimore City Voters, and there were quite a few comments. And one of the comments that you often hear is that there is no need for a study. And you have people saying, cut the check. That's what they say. And, you know, first of all, I want to say a couple of things. Before I even get into responding to that, I just want to point out a little bit more background. As we all know, reparations has been before Congress for quite some time. Decades ago, Representative John Conyers put forth H.R. 40. And it's been pending before Congress forever, and it hasn't gained any traction. So it's great to see this kind of development in Maryland. It's great to see this development in places like New York and California. But with that being said, you know, these people that say cut a check and there's no need to study this issue, you know, I just don't think that they fully understand the issue of reparations. If the government simply just cut some checks to African Americans, in a few days, all that government money would end up back in the hands of our former slave masters. And that wouldn't do us any good. You know, there are some people that would probably just waste that money on some ridiculous and frivolous things. So I do believe that monetary compensation is a part of this issue. You know, it should be a part of any kind of reparations, but it needs to be carefully evaluated and thought out. You know, that's why you need to have a study so that we can know exactly what is the best way to compensate the descendants of slaves and the descendants of the victims of Jim Crow. Because this issue of reparations is not just about slavery, it is also about Jim Crow. So cutting a check is not enough. You know, we need to have a thorough study of the best way to repair the damage that was done as a result of centuries of slavery and decades of Jim Crow. So that's the first thing. The other thing is this: you have these people that try to say that, they shouldn't have to pay reparations for something that happened years ago, for something that happened before any of us were born. They take that position. And they say, well, I'm not responsible for what my ancestors did and all this and that. And there are no living slaves today. So here's what I have to say about that. First of all, you reap the benefits from slavery. The white descendants of these slave masters and white people in general benefit from the legacy of slavery. This whole country's economy was built on the backs of black people. It was built on years of free labor, on the labor of our ancestors, on the enslavement of our ancestors. Not only was the government, a beneficiary of slavery, you had every single aspect of corporate America benefited from slavery. Whether it's colleges and universities that use slave labor, the federal government itself that use slave labor, whether it's insurance companies that insured slaves and banks that benefited from the enslavement of black people, and many corporations that benefit from the enslavement of black people. Many corporations today benefited from the legacy of slavery. And many white people in general have benefited from not only slavery, but the legacy of Jim Crow, a legacy that prevented African Americans today from building generational wealth. So a debt is owed, and we're here to collect it. So this is long overdue. This is a great development. And I hope that Maryland's first African American signs off on this legislation. There's been talk, I read a couple of articles, and in one of the articles, they were talking about how Maryland faces, budget issues, and they're scaling back on, their budget, on the budget here in Maryland. And that's one of the considerations that Governor Wes Moore is taking into account as he decides whether or not to sign on to this particular piece of legislation. The first thing that has to be pointed out with respect to that, this doesn't call for any monetary payment at this time. It simply calls for a study. And I just think that it's ridiculous that it would take the governor so long to decide whether or not to sign a bill that grants reparations to African Americans. I think that when we elect black officials, we're not just electing them to be a token. We're not just electing them so that we can point and say, oh, we have an African American in that position, as just some kind of symbol of pride. This is not about simple identity politics. And, too often that's what we settle for. We settle for identity politics without the actual substance. This is an opportunity for our governor to make it plain that this is not just about, a black face in a high place. This is about a black man actually doing and passing laws that are beneficial to black people. So, identity politics are cool, but it's not enough. It's not sufficient in and of itself. I don't want to just be in a position where I can say, oh, we have a black governor, but if that black governor takes the same positions as a white governor, then it's of no benefit to us to simply have a token in place that's going to do the same thing that the white man does. So we need this brother to sign that piece of legislation so that we can head down the road of reparations, because a debt is due and owing. It's past due, way past due for the African American. All those years, hundreds of years where our ancestors worked under bondage without any compensation whatsoever, built this country off of our backs without any compensation whatsoever. And, with the respect to this argument that, that there are no longer any slaves and all that kind of stuff, reparations is not just about slavery in and of itself. I already made the arguments about how and why, reparations are relevant to today's generation when it comes to slavery. But when you look at the issue of Jim Crow, there are many people that lived during the Jim Crow era that were redlined out of opportunities to build wealth for themselves and their future generations. There are many people that were alive during a time when they had restrictive covenants that prevented Black people from buying property in certain places. Every day when I'm in the city of Baltimore, I see the living legacy of Jim Crow. I see, what has been described as the black butterfly effect. And that's going to be one of the books that we eventually read in the book club, the Black Butterfly Effect, about the segregation and its legacy here in Baltimore, Maryland. Here in this immediate community where I live, you have a racial dividing line called York Road. You have an affluent, predominantly white community on the west side of York Road. It's predominantly white. You got a few Black people sprinkled here and there throughout that white area, just like in tiny little pockets. But for the most part, it's an exclusively white, affluent area. And then on the east side of York Road, you have a predominantly Black area. You have lower incomes, lower life expectancies, lower employment rates. You have dilapidated housing in some parts of the east side of Baltimore, the east side of York Road. So there's a night and day comparison, and that's a part of the living legacy of segregation in this country, a part of the legacy of redlining in this country and in this city in particular. And it's been time for this government, the Maryland legislature, to address this issue. And it starts with a study, but it doesn't and it shouldn't end with a study. So those are my thoughts about this. I'm really interested in hearing what you all have to say. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Like the video, share the video, and shout out to my new subscribers. And again, I want to encourage you all to subscribe so I can make it past that 10,000 subscriber threshold. And I'm almost there. I'm just a couple of subscribers away. So I want to shout out all the people that have supported my channel over the years. Much respect and appreciation. Peace.